on the 8th of December, 1980. Outside the Dakota building in Manhattan, New York, 5 fatal gunshots echoed through the bustling city's sky, finding their way into the body of the English musician John Lennon, instantly snuffing out his life. Before jumping into conclusions about the killer's identity or motives, let me tell you that he was not a serial killer or a hired assassin. The killer was a quiet, peaceful young man named David Chapman. After striking down his victim, Chapman calmly sat on one of the public benches, waiting for the police to arrive, holding the novel he kept reading till the moment of his arrest. The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, a novel he considered his muse for committing his crime. The protagonist of the novel was a teenager, grappling with muddle and turmoil, rebelling against the hypocrisy and deceit of the adults. Chapman resonated deeply with the character and decided to retaliate against these phonies by killing Lennon for being a hypocritic musician. Far from Chapman's assumptions, whether true or not, this novel inspired 2 other young men to repeat the exact same crime. One of them is John Hinckley, who attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan just a year after Chapman's crime, which has sparked many questions concerning this literary style and its effects on teenagers. Apparently, feelings of anxiety and loneliness are an easily promoted commodity for teens. Unfortunately, the bad news is that it might leave a lasting impact that's hard to shake off. An impact that might lead to rebellion, violence, and all forms of justified crime. So, is adolescence an unavoidable trap, as much young adult literature portrays? Are teenagers reckless beings, with half-wits and emotions constantly crushed by anxiety? Or is it a myth masquerading as science and truth, becoming a scarecrow and giving teenagers a free pass for whatever they commit? Cower before the storm. In 2007, while the advice columnist Herb Lycron was browsing through the readers' letters, he came across a message from a furious mother demanding an explanation for her 11-year-old daughter's behavior, who suddenly transformed from a happy child into a constantly angry and rebellious teenager. Responding briefly and indifferently, Lycron said, "Some parents call what you're going through adolescent illness. Just like that, your daughter is a teenager, so she has every right to be crazy, chaotic, and rude without being blamed at all." However, despite what some might think, sparing teenagers from criticism is not a new phenomenon or a fleeting trend, but a principle rooted in the 1830s. That's when the term adolescence was first used. Before being widely outspread by American psychologist G. Stanley Hall in 1904, who was the first to describe adolescence as a period of storms and tensions. Anna Freud followed suit in 1958, confirming that the emotional instability experienced by adolescents is common, and that it's unnatural for someone to be normal during their teenage years. She even went further, saying that teenagers who do not experience emotional turmoil are actually latent patients, susceptible to psychological disturbances in adulthood. This turned the world upside down, leading turmoil to become the norm, and ordinary became the disease waiting to be announced. This prompted the well-known psychologist Albert Bandura to tell us that street surveys have revealed that the word adolescence has come to carry all negative connotations, expressing tension, anxiety, rebellion, and conflicts. Now, we find ourselves in need of a realistic perspective that tells us, how did humans live before discovering adolescence? And why did it suddenly become like a storm that everyone must bow to? The modernity monster. In his scientific article, The Myth of the Teen Brain, the psychologist and adolescent expert Robert Epstein argued that medical explanations for this stage have become quite alarming. Despite what the brain imaging sciences show about the distinctive activities of adolescent brains, Epstein believes that it is wrong to rely on this imaging to explain teens' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, adding that the belief that the brain alone is responsible for behaviors is an unscientific belief. as behavior is a complex and interconnected system involving a number of agents, let alone that behaviors are what shape the brain, not the other way around. Therefore, he believes that treating teens based on G. Stanley Hall's theory is a form of absurdity. Hall based his theory on a narrow segment of American youth influenced by modernity and the Industrial Revolution, and built his assumption on the basis of the biological recapitulation theory, which was scientifically debunked in the 1930s, making all of Stanley's theories questionable. This is corroborated by a study by archaeologist Alice Schlegel and psychologist Herbert Barry, in which they followed up on different studies conducted on adolescence in 186 pre-industrial societies. They found that about 60% of these societies had no clear definition of the term adolescence, as their teens spent most of their time with adults as young people who had emerged from childhood and became closer to adulthood. The study also found that these young people did not show any signs of psychopathy or exhibit any strange social behaviors, which was also confirmed by anthropologists Beatrice and John Whiting through a series of long-term studies, indicating that the emergence of adolescent problems in different cultures was associated with their exposure to Western culture. For example, crime was not a common problem among the Inuit people, indigenous to Canada, until television appeared in 1980, exposing them to Western culture, leading them to decide in 1988 to establish the first police station to deal with the rampant crime in their community. This only shows us who is the real monster that unleashed the poison of adolescence into the world, and fooled us to believe that humans can live more than a third of their lives as children irresponsible for their madness. Redefining adolescence. How many times have you heard of the army of Usama ibn Zayd, who took over the emirate under the rule of Abu Bakr, Umar, and many great companions? Do you remember Usama's age at the time? And do you know that this age now qualifies you as a child in the eyes of the law? How many times have you heard of conquerors like Muhammad ibn al-Qasim al-Thaqafi, Harun al-Rashid, Abd al-Rahman al-Dakhil, Muhammad al-Fatih, and others? What forged these teenagers into men whom the elders follow? And what makes young people today who have passed their 20s troubled teenagers in the eyes of specialists? Perhaps our answer lies here, through Robert Epstein's mentioned article, telling us that the turmoil observed among adolescents in the Western world is nothing but a result of the artificial extension of childhood beyond puberty. Over the past century, children in the developed world have been raised in a way that hinders their maturity, lacking adults' experiences and deprived of interactions that build their characters, despite medical studies vouching for their mental and intellectual abilities that adults and the elderly lack, which is verified by Epstein in another context through a joint study with the researcher Diane Dumas, where they found that there is a direct relationship between adolescents' exposure to an extended childhood and the extent of the psychopathy showing in their behaviors. These facts highlight the wisdom of Islamic Sharia and its comprehensiveness. A child who has not reached puberty and is not accountable for anything, while being subjected to upbringing and rehabilitation, an adult who is accountable, responsible, and well-raised and prepared. Through this, Islam places human beings on the path of guidance and maturity from the first moment their physical structure is complete, including them in worship and responsibility, legislating marriage and chastity for them whenever they can, to complete their soul, mind, and emotion, along with their body's structure. This alone is what used to create leaders and scholars, prodigies at the same ages that the world buries today beneath the ashes of adolescence. Islam is not against taking care of teenagers by understanding and guiding them towards the world of adults. But it does not accept extending the childhood of these young people to ages in which humans used to build houses and lead countries, snatching from them the accountability imposed by Allah, allowing them to ruin themselves while Allah has blessed them with intellect, strength, wakefulness, and enthusiasm. Contemplate the saying of Allah, the most exalted and generous. They said, We heard a young man mention them who is called Abraham. Al-Anbiya 60. Then see how Allah guided the world by this young man and his descendants after being engulfed in error.